The triplets join their hands in a pleading gesture and ask, "Could we fly with you, sir?" Ethan recognizes his own green gaze reflected in them. Amina appears behind her children, and the captain feels the world spin before he can respond. The biting Chicago winter wind assaulted the windows of the small apartment in Wicker Park. Amina Ba stood motionless in the bathroom, her trembling hands holding the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, unmistakable. Her heart raced, not with fear but with hope. At 26, she had secured her position as a flight attendant with Delta Airlines, regularly sent money to her family in Liberia, and studied between flights to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. She placed the test on the counter and took a deep breath, examining her reflection. Her dark eyes, usually bright with determination, now revealed vulnerability. She smoothed her curly hair and straightened her shoulders. This wasn't part of her meticulously planned life trajectory, but perhaps it was something even better. The memory of her first encounter with Ethan Cole flashed through her mind. It had happened during Delta's training program 3 years ago. She had been reserved about her Liberian background, carefully pronouncing every word to minimize her accent. Ethan, with his broad shoulders and effortless confidence, had approached her during a break. "First day and you've already mastered the emergency protocol better than people who've been here for years," he had said, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "I study a lot," she had replied, her voice soft but determined. His easy privilege contrasted sharply with her careful navigation of a world where she constantly felt the need to prove herself. Yet something had clicked between them, a connection that had grown over shared flights and late-night conversations about their dreams. Now Amina moved around the apartment, straightening pillows and lighting cinnamon-scented candles, Ethan's favorite. She had prepared a simple dinner, nothing elaborate that might signal the importance of the evening. She wanted the moment to feel natural when she shared the news. The lock turned precisely at 7 o'clock. Ethan entered, his pilot's uniform impeccably pressed, the Delta wings gleaming on his chest. His light brown hair was neatly combed, and his confident stride spoke of someone who had just received good news. "You won't believe it," he announced, setting his bag down. "They've promoted me to first officer on international flights. Paris, London, Tokyo, we're talking major routes here." Amina smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful. Your father must be proud." "Third-generation Cole in the skies." Ethan grinned, loosening his tie. "Dad says it's ahead of schedule, even by Cole standards." The Cole family was aviation royalty in Boston. His grandfather had been a decorated Air Force pilot before founding what became a regional airline. His father had expanded the business internationally, and Ethan was expected to eventually take over the family's aviation holdings. "I made dinner," Amina said, guiding him to the small dining table she had carefully arranged. "You didn't have to. We could have gone out to celebrate," Ethan replied, though he sat down appreciatively. Throughout dinner, Amina listened as Ethan detailed his promotion, the congratulations from senior pilots, his father's rare words of approval. She nodded at appropriate intervals, her hand occasionally drifting to her still flat stomach. The timing wasn't perfect, with his career acceleration, but they had been together for 2 years. Surely this news would be received as an unexpected blessing, not an obstacle. "Ethan," she finally said during a pause in his monologue, "I have news too." "What's up? Did you get that schedule change you wanted?" he asked, taking a sip of wine. Amina took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. A tentative smile formed on her lips. Ethan froze, wine glass halfway to the table. His expression shifted so rapidly that Amina almost missed the flash of panic before his features hardened into something she had never seen before. The silence that followed was colder than the Chicago winter outside. Ethan carefully set down his glass and ran his hand through his hair, his green eyes turning to ice. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his lips. "You're sure?" "Yes. I took the test today, but I've suspected for a couple of weeks now." Ethan stood abruptly, walking to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. This wasn't in the plans, Amina. You know that. I can't have children now. My career at Delta has barely started. Amina rose and moved toward him, reaching for his hand. I know it's unexpected, but we can figure this out together. We'll make it work. There is no together in this, Amina. His voice cut through the air like metal. He turned to face her, and the coldness in his eyes made her step back. You've always been insufficient for someone like me. A flight attendant with unrealistic dreams of medicine, and now pregnant? You would be a burden to my future. The words hit Amina like physical blows. In 2 years of relationship, she had never imagined that beneath the caresses and promises lurked a man capable of such cruelty. What are you saying? She whispered, her hand instinctively covering her stomach. I'm saying what my parents have always said, that you were interesting, exotic even, but not the kind of woman to build a Cole family with. He began gathering his keys and wallet as he spoke. I'll be honest. You were a detour in my path, something to pass the time while I waited for someone suitable. Tears filled Amina's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I never asked to be suitable for your family name. I thought we loved each other. Ethan laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Love? Sure, in a way. But love doesn't build legacies, Amina. The Coles have a position to maintain. I have responsibilities. And this child isn't one of them? She asked, her voice gaining strength. That situation can be resolved. I'll help financially, of course. His tone was clinical now, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. Amina stood straighter, her dignity wrapping around her like armor. I don't want your money. I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me that the last 2 years meant nothing. They meant something, he said, pausing at the door. Just not everything. Not enough to derail my life for a pregnancy that was clearly your mistake. My mistake? We were together in this. Were we? Check your birth control prescription dates, Amina. This wasn't what I signed up for. That night, the apartment door closed with a final thud. Ethan left without looking back, leaving only a check for $5,000 on the table with a note to solve the problem. Amina tore the check to pieces. The problem growing inside her would be her strength, not her sentence. The following weeks became a nightmare of survival. After fainting during a flight, courtesy of morning sickness, Amina faced a disciplinary hearing at Delta. Despite her perfect record, she was dismissed for safety concerns, though she suspected her pregnancy and relationship with a newly promoted pilot were the real issues. The reality was merciless. Immigrant, pregnant, unemployed, with mounting medical bills. She secured 2 jobs, receptionist at a clinic during the day and waitress at night, while her body changed and fatigue became her constant companion. At her 4th-month appointment, the doctor showed her the ultrasound with an expression of surprise. It's not just 1 baby, Ms. Ba, it's 3. Triplets. The initial shock gave way to fierce determination. If 1 baby had been rejected as insufficient for Ethan Cole, 3 would be her proof of superabundance. She relocated to New York, where a distant cousin offered a temporary couch. The Liberian community in Harlem embraced her. A Baptist church donated furniture, an immigrant association helped with baby clothes. Amina studied borrowed medical textbooks from the library between double shifts, while her belly grew exponentially. In her 7th month, she collapsed on the restaurant kitchen floor. Hospitalized with preeclampsia, doctors advanced the delivery. Alone at New York Presbyterian Hospital, she gave birth to Zora, Malcolm, and Maya, 3 tiny lives who entered the world 7 weeks early. In the NICU, Amina sat between the incubators, alternating hours of vigil among the 3 babies. A nurse found her whispering to her children, "You are the Coles he will never know, and I am the Ba he underestimated. I promise that one day, when we meet again, he will see exactly how much he underestimated us. Not for revenge, but because our existence will be our greatest victory." As Amina drifted to sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her hand reaching through the incubator port to touch Malcolm's tiny fingers, she couldn't have imagined that in 10 years she would stand before an audience of world leaders, and that the man who called her insufficient would bow before her success. As Amina drifted to sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her hand reaching through the incubator port to touch Malcolm's tiny fingers, a bulletin board outside the NICU displayed job postings. That board would become her lifeline in the coming days, a portal to survival in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. 2 weeks after giving birth, Amina stood before that same bulletin board, circles drawn in red marker around the few positions that might accept a newly postpartum immigrant with 3 premature babies in intensive care. Her body still ached from the emergency C-section, the surgical site sending sharp pains whenever she moved too quickly. Sleep had become a distant memory, with her days divided between the NICU and desperate attempts to secure employment. "These won't pay enough for daycare for 1 baby, let alone 3, she whispered to herself, calculating figures in her head. Her savings were evaporating with alarming speed, consumed by the cost of the tiny apartment she'd hastily rented near the hospital. The next morning, Amina adjusted her loose-fitting blouse, carefully concealing the postpartum body that still looked 5 months pregnant. She had scheduled 3 interviews for today, planning them around the feeding times of her tiny babies. The first was at a medical clinic in Harlem, just 15 blocks from the hospital. "You have no formal medical training," the office manager stated, scanning her resume with obvious skepticism. "I've completed 2 years of pre-medical courses," Amina replied, sitting painfully straight to project confidence. "I'm familiar with medical terminology, basic procedures, and I'm fluent in 4 languages, which could help with your diverse patient population." The manager's eyes narrowed. "Where are you from originally?" "Liberia," Amina answered, recognizing the familiar shift in expression, interest mixed with assumptions. "And your work authorization?" "I have permanent resident status." After a moment's hesitation, the manager sighed. "Look, we need someone immediately. Can you start tomorrow?" Amina swallowed hard, thinking of her babies, still too fragile to leave the NICU. "Yes, absolutely." That evening, she collapsed into a plastic chair between the 3 incubators, her feet throbbing after walking 20 blocks to save on subway fare. She reached into her bag and pulled out a dog-eared medical textbook borrowed from the hospital library. "Today, I got a job," she whispered to Zora, whose tiny chest rose and fell with the help of a respirator. "It doesn't pay much, but it's in a clinic. I'll learn something there." She moved to Malcolm's incubator. "And I found a restaurant that needs evening help." Finally, to Maya, "It means I'll have less time here with you 3, but more means to care for you when you come home." The first day at the clinic was a baptism by fire. Amina worked the front desk, checking in patients, filing insurance forms, and observing everything with careful attention. During brief lulls, she scribbled notes about procedures she witnessed, terminology she heard, medications she processed. "You're not supposed to be writing that down," a nurse commented, catching her documenting the treatment protocol for a diabetic patient. Amina tucked the notebook away. "I'm sorry. I'm studying to become a doctor. I learn by writing things down." The nurse studied her for a moment. "Med school?" "Eventually. I was taking prerequisite courses before—" She paused. "Before life got complicated." That night at the Senegalese restaurant where she'd secured her second job, Amina's feet and back screamed in protest as she moved between tables. The owner, a kind-eyed woman named Fatou, noticed her wincing. "How long since you had your baby?" she asked during a quiet moment. 3 weeks, Amina replied, then hesitated. "Actually, babies. Triplets." Fatou's eyes widened. "Triplets? Where are they now?" "Still in the hospital. They were born early." The older woman shook her head. "You should be resting, not serving tables." "I need the money," Amina said simply. "The hospital bills. The apartment." "The father?" Amina's expression hardened. There is no father. Fatu didn't press further, but before Amina left that night, she pressed a container of food into her hands. For strength, she said. 3 months passed in a grueling routine. Mornings at the clinic, evenings at the restaurant, nights divided between studying and sleeping on a chair in the NICU. Amina lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her cheekbones becoming sharply defined, her eyes perpetually shadowed. On a rainy Tuesday in May, she arrived at the hospital for her morning visit before work. The NICU nurse greeted her with unusual solemnity. "Dr. Abrams would like to speak with you," she said, leading Amina to a small consultation room. The neonatologist entered moments later, carrying a thick folder. "Ms. Ba," he began, his expression serious. "I've been monitoring your triplets closely. We need to discuss their progress." Amina's heart stuttered. "Has something happened?" "Actually, it's about their development. I'd like you to look at this." He opened the folder to reveal an ultrasound image. This was taken yesterday. Amina studied the image, trying to understand. "Is something wrong?" "Quite the opposite. Your babies are showing remarkable resilience. In fact," he continued, turning to another page, "I believe it's time we discuss discharge planning for Zora. Malcolm and Maya will need a few more weeks, but they're progressing well." The words struck Amina with both joy and terror. Discharge? But they're still so small. Zora has reached 4 pounds, her breathing is stable and she's feeding well. She's ready to continue growing at home. Amina's mind raced. 1 baby at home, 2 still in the hospital, 2 jobs, no childcare. The logistics seemed impossible. That evening, she sat on the edge of her unmade sofa bed, calculating expenses against income on a worn notepad. The numbers refused to cooperate, creating deficits no matter how she arranged them. A knock at the door interrupted her desperate mathematics. Fatu stood in the hallway, flanked by 3 older women Amina recognized from the West African community in Harlem. "We heard your babies are coming home," Fatu said without preamble. "We've brought some things." The women entered carrying bags of baby clothes, a second-hand crib, formula, and diapers. Amina pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "How did you know?" "Word travels in our community," one woman replied. "You are not alone here." Together, they transformed Amina's sparse studio apartment into a home ready to welcome a newborn. They assembled the crib, washed tiny clothes, and arranged a changing station on top of a repurposed dresser. "The church has organized a schedule," Fatu explained. "Different women will come to help while you work. When the other babies come home, we'll adjust." Tears streamed down Amina's face. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't thank family," Fatu said simply. "You just accept help when needed and give it when you can." The following week, Amina brought Zora home. The tiny girl, still smaller than most newborns, fit perfectly in the crook of her arm. True to their word, women from the Liberian and Senegalese communities appeared at scheduled times, caring for Zora while Amina worked and visited the other babies. One evening, while studying late after her restaurant shift, Amina found herself nodding off over her anatomy textbook. A passage about the heart, resilient, adaptable, capable of functioning even when damaged, blurred before her eyes. She turned to look at Zora sleeping peacefully in her crib. "Your heart is perfect," she whispered, "and I promise I'll make sure it stays that way." In the weeks that followed, Malcolm and then finally Maya joined their sister at home. The tiny apartment became crowded with 3 cribs, donated by different community members. Amina adapted to feeding schedules that allowed her barely 30 minutes of consecutive sleep, changing diapers with mechanical efficiency and still somehow maintaining her 2 jobs. At the clinic, she continued learning, watching procedures with keen interest, asking questions during break times. At the restaurant, she served food with increasing speed, maximizing tips that went directly into a jar labeled medical school. On a warm night in August, Amina sat on her fire escape, the 3 babies finally asleep inside. She held a letter from the community college, confirming her enrollment in night classes for the fall semester. The path ahead was impossibly steep, but for the first time since Ethan's abandonment, it felt navigable. As she looked up at the stars barely visible through New York's light pollution, Amina whispered a promise to herself and her children: "We will build something extraordinary together." While Amina dozed on the fire escape, her hand protectively reaching through the window toward the triplets' cribs, she couldn't have predicted that those 3 children would one day walk the hallways of the world's most prestigious universities, carrying the surname she, not Ethan, would give them. While Amina dozed on the fire escape, her hand protectively reaching through the window toward the triplets' cribs, her exhausted body finally surrendered to sleep. Her dreams were not of the future she once planned with Ethan, but of the next day's challenges: formula to prepare, diapers to change, shifts to work, and precious moments to steal with her babies between it all. A sharp pain in her lower back jolted her awake. The morning sun streamed through the windows of her tiny apartment, illuminating the 3 cribs arranged in a semicircle. Amina winced as she straightened, her body still recovering from the C-section 3 months earlier. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, feeling the tender scar beneath her thin cotton shirt. "Just a few more hours," she whispered to herself, checking her watch. Her shift at the restaurant wouldn't end until midnight, and she'd promised to stop by the hospital afterward to speak with Dr. Peterson about her medical school applications. The day progressed with the mechanical efficiency that had become her life, dropping the triplets with Mrs. Osei from the Liberian Community Center, rushing to the clinic for her morning shift, stealing 10 minutes during lunch to pump breast milk, then hurrying to the restaurant by 4. "You look pale today," remarked Fatu, eyeing her with maternal concern as Amina tied her apron. "I'm fine," Amina insisted, though the persistent pain in her back had intensified throughout the day. "Just tired." By 9 o'clock, the restaurant was packed with Friday night diners. Amina moved between tables, balancing plates with practiced precision despite the dizziness that occasionally blurred her vision. She ignored the pain shooting through her lower back, the pressure building in her head, the swelling in her feet that made each step agony. "Table 7 needs more water," the manager called. Amina nodded, filling a pitcher at the service station. As she turned toward the dining room, the restaurant tilted suddenly. The pitcher slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Amina reached for the counter to steady herself, but her legs buckled. "Someone call an ambulance." Fatu's voice seemed to come from far away as darkness closed in around Amina. The last thing she heard was the clatter of silverware as diners turned to stare at the young woman collapsed in a pool of water and broken glass. White lights, beeping monitors, the antiseptic smell of hospital corridors. Amina blinked awake to find herself in an emergency room, an IV dripping into her arm. "Ms. Ba, can you hear me?" A doctor in blue scrubs leaned over her, concern etched across his face. "You're at New York Presbyterian. You collapsed at work." "My babies," Amina whispered, her throat dry. "I need to get home to my babies." "Your friend Fatu is arranging care for them," the doctor assured her. "Right now, we need to focus on you. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You have severe preeclampsia, which can develop even after delivery, especially with multiple births." "But I delivered months ago," Amina protested weakly. "Postpartum preeclampsia can occur up to 6 weeks after delivery, but your case is unusual. The strain of caring for triplets while working 2 jobs has likely exacerbated your condition." The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to monitor you for at least 24 hours. If your blood pressure doesn't stabilize, we may need to consider more aggressive treatment." Tears welled in Amina's eyes. "I can't stay. I can't afford—" "Your health insurance from the clinic covers this," the doctor interrupted, "and there's someone here who'd like to speak with you about the triplets." He stepped aside, revealing Dr. Peterson, the neonatologist who had cared for her babies. The older man approached her bedside, his kind eyes surveying her with professional assessment. "Miss Bah, When was the last time you slept for more than 2 consecutive hours? Amina looked away. I don't remember. Dr. Peterson nodded, as if her answer confirmed a suspicion. The nurses in the NICU told me you were there every night after work, often until dawn, then would go straight to your morning job. I needed to be with them, she said simply, and now they need you to be well. He pulled a chair closer to her bed. Ms. Ba, Amina, I've spoken with social services. There are programs that can help, resources you haven't accessed. I don't want charity, she said, her voice stronger, and I won't risk losing my children to the system. This isn't about charity or taking your children, Dr. Peterson assured her. It's about utilizing support that exists precisely for situations like yours. Single mothers, especially immigrants, often fall through the cracks not because help isn't available, but because they don't know how to navigate the system. Over the next 24 hours, as medications slowly lowered her blood pressure, Amina learned about WIC benefits she qualified for, childcare subsidies available through the state, and a special medical scholarship for single parents pursuing healthcare careers, all resources she hadn't known existed. On the third day, deemed stable enough for discharge, Amina sat on the edge of the hospital bed while a nurse reviewed her medication instructions. Dr. Peterson asked to see you before you leave, the nurse mentioned, helping Amina gather her few belongings. He's waiting in the conference room down the hall. Dr. Peterson wasn't alone. A social worker sat beside him, along with a woman Amina didn't recognize. Amina, this is Dr. Rivera from our community health program, Dr. Peterson introduced. We've been discussing your situation. Dr. Rivera smiled warmly. Dr. Peterson tells me you're interested in medical school. It's my dream, Amina admitted. But with 3 infants. That's why we wanted to speak with you, Dr. Peterson interjected. The hospital has a program that supports promising pre-med students from underrepresented backgrounds. It includes mentorship, MCAT preparation, and potential scholarship recommendations. Amina straightened in her chair. Why would you offer this to me? Because I've been watching you, Dr. Peterson said simply. The way you documented every detail of your baby's care, how you studied medical texts during your NICU vigils, the questions you asked, they showed not just a mother's concern but a clinical mind. Then I checked your academic records from before the pregnancy. Straight A's in all your pre-med courses, despite working full-time. We believe in investing in future doctors who understand healthcare from multiple perspectives, Dr. Rivera added. Someone who has navigated the system as both an immigrant and a patient brings invaluable insight. Hope flickered in Amina's chest, quickly tempered by reality. Even with help, I still need to support my children. That's the other part of our proposal, the social worker joined in. We've secured temporary housing for you through a program for medical education candidates with dependents. It's a 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital, with integrated childcare services in the building. For the first time in months, Amina allowed herself to imagine a future beyond day-to-day survival. When can I see this apartment? The new apartment was modest but felt palatial compared to her studio. 2 small bedrooms, a living area with actual furniture, a kitchen with working appliances. Best of all, the building housed a daycare center where residents could exchange childcare hours, creating a cooperative system that would allow Amina to work and study while ensuring her triplets received proper care. 2 weeks later, Amina sat between the 3 cribs in their new home. Zora, Malcolm, and Maya slept peacefully, their tiny bodies growing stronger each day. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Amina studied their features. Zora's determined brow, Malcolm's contemplative expression even in sleep, Maya's delicate hands always reaching outward. She leaned over Maya's crib, gently stroking her daughter's cheek. "The nurse today called you miracle babies," she whispered. "But the real miracle is what you've taught me about strength." Moving to Malcolm's crib, she adjusted his blanket. "We're going to be okay now. I have a plan, a real one, with support." Finally, beside Zora, she murmured, "And one day, When we meet him again, he'll see exactly what he walked away from. In the quiet room, surrounded by her children, Amina felt a sense of purpose solidify within her. The path ahead remained daunting, but for the first time since Ethan's betrayal, it felt possible. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing, planning her course schedule, childcare rotations, study hours, mapping the journey that would transform the abandoned flight attendant into Dr. Amina Ba. In the UTI neonatal, Amina sat between the incubators, alternating hours of vigil among the 3 babies. A nurse found her whispering to her children, "You are the Coles he will never know, and I am the Ba he underestimated. I promise that one day when we meet again, he will see exactly how much he underestimated us, not for revenge, but because our existence will be our greatest victory." Between diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights, Amina couldn't have predicted that this small apartment in Harlem would be just the first chapter of the extraordinary story she would build, or that her name would one day be pronounced with reverence in the same circles that had rejected her existence. Between diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights, Amina couldn't have predicted that this small apartment in Harlem would be just the first chapter of the extraordinary story she would build, or that her name would one day be pronounced with reverence in the same circles that had rejected her existence. 3 years passed like a whirlwind. The sun rose on a crisp autumn morning as Amina's alarm clock blared at 4:30. She extended her arm carefully in the dim light, silencing it before the sound could wake the triplets sleeping in the adjacent room. Pulling her textbook onto her lap, she studied by the soft glow of her phone's flashlight, highlighting passages about cardiovascular systems while mentally rehearsing the day's schedule. By 6 o'clock, she moved quietly into the children's room, where 3 small beds had replaced the cribs just months earlier. 3-year-old Zora was already awake, dark curls framing her serious face as she paged through a picture book. "Good morning, my scholar," Amina whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Mommy, this book says heart has 4 rooms," Zora said, pointing to a simplified anatomy illustration. "Chambers," Amina corrected gently. "The heart has 4 chambers." Malcolm stirred next, immediately reaching for the wooden blocks arranged in perfect rows beside his bed. Even in sleep, he maintained their precise order, by size, color, and shape. 6 blocks plus 3 blocks equals 9 blocks, he announced instead of a greeting, his small fingers rearranging his treasures. "That's right, my mathematician," Amina smiled, helping him select clothes for the day. Maya was last to wake, stretching languidly before launching into a stream of morning chatter that seamlessly blended English with phrases from the Spanish she'd absorbed from their Dominican neighbors. "Buenos dias, Mama. ¿Podemos tener pancakes today?" she asked, her pronunciation flawless. Breakfast was a strategic operation. Nutrient-dense oatmeal topped with fruit purchased on sale, milk fortified with vitamins, and stories that doubled as educational opportunities. Amina recounted Liberian folktales while packing lunches, inserting vocabulary lessons and moral teachings between bites. "Remember what the turtle taught the leopard?" she asked, zipping Maya's jacket. "Patience beats strength," the triplets chorused. The morning commute had become a masterclass in efficiency. Dropping the children at Little Scholars Daycare by 7:30, Amina recited medical terminology into Malcolm's eager ear while Zora corrected her brother's occasional mistakes. Maya practiced counting in Spanish with the bus driver who beamed at her precocious charm. "Your children are remarkable," Ms. Williams, the daycare director, observed as Amina signed them in. "Zora read an entire storybook to the class yesterday. Most of our 5-year-olds can't do that." "They absorb everything," Amina replied, checking her watch. Her shift as a medical assistant began in 20 minutes. "Dr. Harrison mentioned testing them for the gifted program," Ms. Williams continued. "Their development is extraordinary." Pride mingled with anxiety in Amina's chest. Exceptional children would need exceptional opportunities that required resources she was still struggling to secure. At Harlem Community Health Center, Amina moved with practiced efficiency, her blue scrubs crisp despite countless washings. Under Dr. Peterson's mentorship, she had advanced from receptionist to medical assistant, gaining hands-on experience that made her pre-med textbooks come alive. She drew blood with precision, prepared examination rooms with meticulous care, and asked thoughtful questions that impressed the physicians. "Your technique with that venipuncture was perfect," Dr. Peterson commented after observing her with a particularly difficult patient. "Medical school applications going well?" "I submitted to Columbia last week," Amina replied, organizing sample vials. "Still working on NYU and Cornell statements." "They'd be fools not to accept you," he said with characteristic directness. "Your clinical instincts are better than half the first-year residents I teach." Evenings transformed into a carefully choreographed ballet of childcare and education. After collecting the triplets, Amina would prepare dinner while quizzing Zora on reading words, challenging Malcolm with counting puzzles, and encouraging Maya to translate instructions into multiple languages. Twice weekly, Amina joined other Liberian mothers in a community study group, their children playing together while the women took turns watching them and reviewing course materials. These women, nurses, teachers' aides, aspiring professionals, had become her lifeline, offering childcare, encouragement, and the understanding that only fellow immigrants and mothers could provide. "Aminata, your organic chemistry notes saved me on the quiz," Fatima said one evening, passing her a container of homemade cassava leaf stew. "And your children taught mine that song about the circulatory system," Amina laughed, watching Malcolm solemnly explain blood flow to a fascinated 5-year-old. The letter from Columbia University arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Amina stared at the envelope, her heart pounding as she stood in the building's shared lobby. The triplets danced around her legs, sensing her anticipation. "Open it, Mommy!" Maya urged, tugging at her rain-dampened coat. With trembling fingers, Amina broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then read it again to be certain. "I got in," she whispered, "with a partial scholarship." Zora's brow furrowed. "Why are you crying? Is that bad?" Amina knelt, gathering her children close. "No, my love. Sometimes people cry when they're very happy." "You're accepted?" Malcolm asked, his analytical mind seeking confirmation. "Yes. I'm going to become a doctor." Maya clapped her hands. "Dr. Mommy, can you fix my teddy bear's arm now?" That evening, Dr. Peterson arrived at Amina's apartment with a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate. He'd become more than a mentor. He was the closest thing to family support Amina had in America. "Columbia's program is rigorous," he warned as they sat at her small kitchen table after the triplets were asleep. "With 3 children, you'll need every support system available. I've arranged childcare exchanges with the Liberian community," Amina said, "and the scholarship covers half the tuition. And the rest? Loans, more shifts at the clinic. I'll manage." Dr. Peterson nodded, his expression somber. "You always do, but I want you to accept this." He slid an envelope across the table. "It's not charity. It's an investment in a colleague who will save more lives than I ever could." Inside was a check that would cover her remaining tuition for the first year. Her first day at Columbia Medical School was a study in contrasts. Among students predominantly from privileged backgrounds, many younger and all with fewer responsibilities, Amina stood out, not just as one of few black women, but as the only mother in her cohort. "You have children?" a classmate asked during orientation, eyes widening when Amina mentioned triplets. 3 3-year-olds, she confirmed, organizing her schedule with military precision. "How will you handle the workload?" another student wondered, scrolling through the syllabus with an expression of alarm. Amina smiled slightly. "The same way I've handled everything else, one day at a time." That night, she read bedtime stories to the triplets, marveling at how their distinct personalities had bloomed. Zora insisted on books about the human body, her questions increasingly sophisticated. Malcolm arranged his blocks into what he called number families, explaining groupings that revealed an intuitive understanding of mathematics. Maya Having spent the afternoon with their elderly Cuban neighbor, regaled them with stories in Spanish-accented English. "Mommy," Zora asked as Amina tucked her in, "where is our daddy?" The question Amina had been preparing for since their birth still caught her unprepared. She sat on the edge of the small bed, choosing her words carefully. "Your father wasn't ready to be part of our family," she said simply, "but we four are complete." "Do other kids have daddies?" Malcolm asked from his bed. "Many do. Families come in different shapes." "Is he a bad person?" Zora persisted. Amina touched her daughter's cheek. "He made choices that hurt us, but those choices made me stronger, and they gave me you three, the greatest gifts of my life." Later that night, Amina sat at her desk, staring at her first medical school assignment while fatigue pulled at her consciousness. On her phone, a notification appeared. Her first A+ on an anatomy lab report. Her professor had added a comment, "Exceptional precision and insight. Your surgical technique shows natural talent." She smiled, allowing herself a moment of pride before returning to her studies. To celebrate, she'd take the triplets for ice cream tomorrow, a small luxury that had once been unthinkable. While observing her three children sleeping peacefully after their small celebration, Amina couldn't have imagined that in less than 7 years, it would be she who would sign the check to purchase an entire building in Manhattan, transforming her dream of helping others into a reality greater than she had ever dared to dream. While observing her three children sleeping peacefully after their small celebration, Amina couldn't have imagined that in less than 7 years, it would be she who would sign the check to purchase an entire building in Manhattan, transforming her dream of helping others into a reality greater than she had ever dared to dream. 4 years later, the grand auditorium of Columbia University Medical School buzzed with anticipation. Families clutched bouquets and graduation programs as faculty and academic regalia lined the stage. Among them sat Amina Ba, now 33, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the thundering of her heart. And delivering this year's graduating address, selected for exceptional academic achievement and commitment to humanitarian medicine, Dr. Amina Ba, announced the dean, his voice carrying across the packed hall. As Amina approached the podium, her gaze found 3 small figures in the front row. 7-year-old Zora sat primly, her notebook open as she recorded her mother's achievement. Malcolm adjusted his bow tie, his analytical eyes calculating the exact dimensions of the stage. Maya beamed with unrestrained pride, her hands clasped under her chin in excitement. 7 years ago, I stood in an emergency room, a single mother of newborn triplets, being told I might not survive the night. Amina began, her voice steady and clear. Today, I stand before you as proof that the most formidable barriers can be overcome when determination meets opportunity. Her speech wove together personal struggle and professional vision, drawing spontaneous applause when she spoke of developing healthcare systems that recognized the humanity in every patient. As she concluded, her voice softened with emotion. To my children, who did their homework beside me through countless study sessions, who understood when mommy needed just 10 more minutes to finish a chapter, who inspire me daily with their brilliance and compassion. This achievement belongs to you as much as to me. 3 weeks after graduation, Amina sat in an unfamiliar office in Manhattan's Upper East Side, her professional attire masking her discomfort in such opulent surroundings. Across the polished conference table, 2 administrators from the prestigious Gardner Academy regarded her with polite curiosity. "Dr. Ba, we rarely encounter applicants with profiles like your children's," said the admissions director, reviewing 3 identical folders with different names. "Our testing indicates they function academically at levels 4 to 5 years beyond their age group." "They've always been quick learners," Amina acknowledged, pride mingling with anxiety. "To be frank, they're not just advanced, they demonstrate exceptional giftedness. Zora's neurological assessment places her in the top 0.1% for analytical reasoning. Malcolm's mathematical abilities are simply astounding for a child of any age, and Maya's linguistic facility Fluency in 5 languages at age 7 is unprecedented in our evaluations. We're prepared to offer all 3 full scholarships to our program for exceptionally gifted children, the second administrator added. Our resources for students like yours are unmatched in the country. That evening, as Amina walked her children through Central Park, she explained what the scholarship would mean. You'd have special classes, advanced materials, teachers who understand how your minds work. Will we still be together? Malcolm asked, his brow furrowed with concern. You'll each have individual learning plans, but yes, you'll be at the same school. Zora stopped walking, her expression serious beyond her years. The other children there, will they be like us? Amina knelt to meet her daughter's gaze. Like you how, love? Different. The children at our school say we talk funny, that we know too much. Amina gathered all 3 close. At this new school, being exceptional isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate. During her medical residency at New York Presbyterian, Amina specialized in tropical diseases and humanitarian medicine, drawing on her Liberian heritage and personal experience navigating healthcare as an immigrant. Her approach to patients from marginalized communities drew attention from senior physicians. Your patient satisfaction scores are the highest in the department, Dr. Singh, the residency director, noted during her review, particularly among refugee and immigrant populations. They need more than medical treatment, Amina explained. They need to be seen as whole people with dignity, not just collections of symptoms. One evening, after a grueling shift treating a Sudanese family recently arrived from a refugee camp, Amina found herself documenting systematic failures in their care. Despite the hospital's resources, critical needs had been missed because standard protocols failed to account for the realities of displaced populations. She began developing a modified assessment framework, integrating cultural considerations, trauma-informed approaches, and practical realities of refugee healthcare. Working late into the night after the triplets were asleep, she crafted what would eventually become the BA protocol for crisis zone medical intervention. When Dr. Peterson reviewed her initial draft, his eyes widened with recognition of something extraordinary. This isn't just a process improvement, Amina. This is a paradigm shift in humanitarian medicine. It's just common sense, she demurred. No, he insisted. It's the perspective of someone who understands both sides of the equation, the medical establishment and the vulnerable patient. You need to present this at the International Conference on Humanitarian Healthcare next month. The triplets flourished at Gardner Academy. Zora's fascination with neuroscience deepened, her questions becoming increasingly sophisticated. During a school field trip to a brain research laboratory at Columbia, she stunned the lead scientist with her understanding of neural pathways. Your daughter just identified a connection we're exploring in our current research, the scientist told Amina afterward. Has she been reading journal articles? Malcolm's mathematical prowess manifested in unexpected ways. During a national competition for students twice his age, he solved complex equations with a calm certainty that unsettled judges. He doesn't just know the formulas, his teacher explained. He seems to intuitively understand mathematical relationships that most adults struggle to grasp. Maya's gift for languages expanded beyond acquisition to cultural nuance. When international patients arrived at the hospital where Amina worked, Maya often accompanied her mother, effortlessly bridging communication gaps that professional interpreters struggled with. She doesn't just translate words, an impressed colleague observed. She translates meaning, intention, emotion. At the International Conference on Humanitarian Healthcare, Amina presented her protocol with nervous determination. Standing before experts from WHO, Médecins Sans Frontières, and global health organizations, she spoke not with academic distance, but with the authority of lived experience. Traditional medical protocols assume baseline conditions that simply don't exist in crisis zones, she explained, her slides illustrating stark realities from refugee camps. When we fail to account for these differences, we fail our most vulnerable patients. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. After her presentation, Doctor. Peterson introduced her to representatives from the Gates Foundation and World Health Organization. This young doctor's approach could revolutionize how we deliver care in crisis situations, he told them. Her personal journey informs a perspective we desperately need in global health leadership. 3 months later, Amina sat across from potential investors in a sleek Manhattan conference room, presenting her vision for a pilot implementation of her protocol in Liberia. She spoke with passionate precision about outcomes, metrics, and sustainability, while remaining authentically connected to the human impact of the work. "What makes your approach different from existing humanitarian efforts?" asked a representative from a major foundation. "I've been the patient without resources, the immigrant navigating an incomprehensible system, the mother making impossible choices between medicine and food," Amina replied. "Those experiences inform every aspect of this protocol." When the funding was approved, Amina made plans for her first return to Liberia since leaving as a teenager. The triplets, now understanding the significance of their heritage, bubbled with questions about the country they knew only from stories and video calls with distant relatives. The moment they stepped off the plane in Monrovia, humidity wrapping around them like a warm blanket, Amina felt a circle completing. At the airport, her mother waited, tears streaming down her face as she beheld her grandchildren for the first time. "They have your determination," she whispered to Amina in Capella, their native language, "and his eyes." "But my heart," Amina replied firmly. In the rural clinic where Amina implemented her pilot program, the triplets became unexpected assets. Zora organized patient files with meticulous care. Malcolm calculated medication dosages with uncanny speed. Maya moved between patients, translating their concerns into clinical language that helped local doctors provide more effective care. At night, under a star-filled African sky so different from New York's light-polluted darkness, Amina sat with her mother on the porch of their family home. "He said I was insufficient, Mama," she confided, finally sharing the full story of Ethan's cruelty. "But I always knew I was more." Her mother took her hand, weathered fingers wrapping around Amina's. "Some men can only see what is right in front of them. They have no vision for what might grow from a seed." A local journalist documenting the success of the pilot project approached Amina as she supervised the implementation of her protocol. "Dr. Ba, how do you balance single motherhood with an international medical career?" Amina smiled, watching her children help local staff organize supplies. "I don't separate those parts of my life. My children inform my medicine, and my medicine teaches them compassion. Together, we're building something meaningful." When they returned to New York, Amina found an offer for expanded funding waiting, based on the promising initial results in Liberia. The possibility of implementing her protocol in 5 additional countries suddenly materialized, along with requests for her to consult with major humanitarian organizations. In a modest ceremony in Harlem, attended by the Liberian community that had supported her darkest days, Amina cut the ribbon on the first official office of the Global Health Initiative. The triplets stood beside her, helping to hold the scissors, as a team of just 3 employees applauded. While inaugurating the modest office of her new organization, with the triplets at her side and a team of only 3 people, Amina didn't imagine that in just 3 years, the GHI would be mentioned by the Secretary General of the UN as a model of humanitarian innovation, or that her name would begin to circulate in circles where Ethan Cole struggled to maintain his relevance. While inaugurating the modest office of her new organization, with the triplets at her side and a team of only 3 people, Amina didn't imagine that in just 3 years the GHI would be mentioned by the Secretary General of the UN as a model of humanitarian innovation, or that her name would begin to circulate in circles where Ethan Cole struggled to maintain his relevance. 2 years later, Amina stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Global Health Initiative's headquarters on the 40th floor of the Metropolitan Life Building, watching Manhattan glisten in the morning sun. The organization had expanded beyond her wildest dreams, now operating in 12 countries with staff approaching 500 worldwide. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another crisis in a refugee camp in South Sudan required immediate attention. Dr. Ba, the Darfur team is ready for the video conference, her assistant called from the doorway. And Dr. Okello from WHO is hoping to speak with you about implementing the Ba protocol in 3 additional regions. Amina nodded, straightening her tailored blazer before heading to the conference room where a wall of screens connected her to medical teams across 3 continents. With practiced authority, she guided the discussion on resource allocation, treatment protocols, and evacuation procedures for critical patients. The antibiotics will arrive by tomorrow, she assured the exhausted doctor on the screen, and I've arranged for 2 additional surgeons to join you by week's end. When the call ended, Amina checked her watch. Just enough time to review the quarterly financial reports before collecting the triplets from school. At 9 years old, they were increasingly independent, but she maintained their after-school ritual whenever she wasn't traveling internationally. The financial report confirmed what she already knew. GHI had secured an additional $30 million in funding from a consortium of international donors, bringing their annual operating budget to $120 million. The organization she had started with nothing but determination and insight was now one of the most respected humanitarian healthcare providers in the world. Her phone rang. The children's school. She answered immediately, maternal instinct overriding professional composure. Dr. Ba, this is Principal Lawrence from Gardner Academy. Nothing's wrong, he added quickly, sensing her concern. Actually, I'm calling with extraordinary news. Zora's research paper on neuroplasticity in trauma survivors has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Neuroscience. Her co-author, Dr. Reeves from Harvard, believes it represents a significant contribution to the field. Amina sat down, stunned. But she's only 9. The journal editors don't know that, the principal replied, a smile in his voice. Dr. Reeves submitted it under both their names without mentioning her age. The work stands on its own merit. That evening, their apartment in Upper West Side, modest by New York standards but palatial compared to their Harlem beginnings, buzzed with excitement. Zora ran to the door when Amina arrived, waving the acceptance email. They said my methodology was impressively rigorous, Mom. Dr. Reeves wants me to help with the revisions. Malcolm looked up from his mathematics workbook, his serious expression briefly giving way to a proud smile for his sister. That's statistically improbable. Acceptance rate for first submissions is below 8%. It's because Zora's brain works differently, Maya explained, setting the table for dinner. Professor Garcia says some minds see connections others can't. Her Spanish pronunciation was flawless, as was her French, Arabic, Mandarin, and of course her mother's native Capella. Over dinner, healthy but still budget-conscious, a habit Amina maintained despite their improved circumstances, she listened as each child shared their day. Maya had been selected for advanced placement at Juilliard's pre-college program for her extraordinary cello playing. Malcolm had received his invitation to the National Mathematics Olympiad after winning the regional competition for the 3rd consecutive year. "I'm so proud of all of you," Amina said, her throat tight with emotion. "But remember what we talked about when we moved to this apartment? That privilege comes with responsibility," the triplets recited in unison. "And 3 years ago we had nothing," Zora continued solemnly. "We must never forget where we came from and how to help others." The family's evening routine reflected this philosophy. After homework and practice sessions, each child selected one global news story to discuss, considering how the knowledge they were acquiring might someday help address world problems. Tonight, Malcolm chose a report on water distribution inequities in developing nations. "I'm designing a mathematical model to optimize resource allocation," he explained, sketching equations in his notebook. "If we could predict usage patterns more accurately, we could reduce waste by 43%. Later, after tucking the children into bed, Amina sat at her desk reviewing a draft of her upcoming feature in Time magazine. The editor had called that morning to confirm she had been selected for the 100 Most Influential People list for the second consecutive year. The proposed cover showed Amina in a refugee camp, stethoscope around her neck, kneeling beside a young mother and child. The headline read, "The Doctor Who Redefined Humanitarian Healthcare." Looking at the image, Amina felt a momentary disconnect. The confident woman in the photo seemed far removed from the frightened, abandoned flight attendant of 7 years ago. 2,000 miles away in Boston, Ethan Cole sat in his executive office at Cole Aviation Group headquarters, absently flipping through the same issue of Time magazine. He paused at Amina's cover, a jolt of recognition sending coffee sloshing over the rim of his cup. Quickly, he closed the magazine and slid it into his desk drawer as his assistant announced the arrival of the company's financial advisors. "Mr. Cole, the third quarter projections are concerning," began the senior analyst, sliding a folder across the polished mahogany desk. "The commercial division's losses have accelerated despite cost-cutting measures." Ethan loosened his tie, the weight of 3 generations of Cole aviation legacy heavy on his shoulders. His grandfather's portrait glared down from the wall, a silent accusation. Under Ethan's leadership, the once thriving family business had begun a slow decline, accelerated by his impulsive decisions and alienation of key industry partners. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting next week," his assistant added carefully. "Several major shareholders have expressed concerns about leadership." At home that evening, Ethan's mansion in Beacon Hill stood in stark contrast to Amina's warm, lived-in apartment. Despite its grand foyer and carefully curated art collection, the house felt sterile. His wife, Charlotte, a Boston socialite from a banking family, barely looked up from her tablet when he entered. "James has a fever," she informed him coolly. "The nanny says he's been asking for you all day." Ethan nodded, guilt washing over him as he realized he hadn't seen his 4-year-old son in 3 days, having left before dawn and returned after bedtime each night. His 2-year-old daughter likely wouldn't recognize him if they passed on the street. "I'll look in on him," he promised, climbing the grand staircase to the children's wing. James lay small and vulnerable in his race car bed, cheeks flushed with fever. The nanny, whose name Ethan could never quite remember, recited temperature readings and medication schedules before discreetly withdrawing. "Daddy?" the boy murmured sleepily. "Will you stay?" "Just for a little while, buddy," Ethan replied, perching awkwardly on the edge of the bed, unsure how to comfort his own child. In New York the following morning, Amina received a call from the United Nations Development Program. Dr. Ba, the Secretary General, would like to reference the GHI as a model of innovative humanitarian intervention in his address next month. Would you be willing to provide some background materials? That same morning, Amina declined an offer to host a reality TV show following her work around the world. "My work matters, not my persona," she explained to the disappointed producer. "The patients we serve deserve dignity, not to become entertainment." At a meeting with UN officials later that week, Amina presented data on the implementation of her protocols in Syrian refugee camps. The results were undeniable. Mortality rates had decreased by 38%, while successful treatment outcomes had improved by over 40%. The Ba Protocol represents a fundamental shift in how we approach crisis medicine, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs concluded. "We'd like to begin global implementation immediately." That night, after checking on the sleeping triplets, Amina worked until dawn on proposals for GHI's most ambitious expansion yet. 10 additional countries, including active conflict zones previously considered too dangerous for sustained medical intervention. Her approach challenged conventional wisdom, integrating local knowledge and resources in ways the international community had overlooked. While finalizing plans for GHI's largest expansion to date, Amina didn't know that her path and Ethan Cole's were about to intersect again, on a global stage where neither their shared past nor his power could overshadow the empire she had built. While finalizing plans for GHI's largest expansion to date, Amina didn't know that her path and Ethan Cole's were about to intersect again, on a global stage where neither their shared past nor his power could overshadow the empire she had built. 1 year later, the Metropolitan Life Building's 40th floor hummed with purposeful energy. Amina stood before the wall-sized map in GHY's main conference room, colored pins marking their 27 operational sites across 4 continents. Her executive team, now 30 strong, waited attentively as she outlined the final preparations for the UN Global Health Summit. The Secretary General's office confirmed this morning, Amina announced, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had cultivated over years of speaking in crisis zones and boardrooms alike. The BA protocol will be formally adopted as the international standard for medical intervention in conflict areas and refugee camps. Applause rippled through the room. A decade of meticulous work, beginning with notes scribbled during her residency and refined through implementations in increasingly challenging environments, had culminated in this moment of global recognition. Dr. Ba, her assistant approached, tablet in hand. Your presentation materials have been finalized for the summit, and I've confirmed your availability for the panel on women's leadership in global health. Also, the triplets called. They want to know if you'll meet them at JFK tomorrow when they return from California. Amina checked her watch. A simple, elegant timepiece that replaced the plastic digital one she'd worn through medical school. What time does their flight arrive? 2:15. I've arranged for a car to take you directly from your morning meeting at Mount Sinai. Amina nodded, a smile softening her professional demeanor. The triplets, now 10 years old, had spent the past month at Stanford University's summer program for exceptionally gifted youth. Their absence left her apartment strangely silent, though weekly video calls kept her updated on their extraordinary achievements. That evening, alone in her Upper West Side apartment, Amina reviewed her keynote address for the summit. The words on her laptop screen represented more than a speech. They embodied a philosophy of healthcare forged through personal struggle and professional rigor. As the organization's annual report lay open beside her, $120 million in funding, 3,000 staff members worldwide, partnerships with 17 major universities, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection on how far she had come. The buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. The profile photo of Dr. Nisha Patel, GHI's Director of Asian Operations, flashed on the screen. Amina, sorry to call so late, Nisha began, but I've just received the final participant list for the UN summit from our contact in the Secretary General's office. You might want to see it. Is there a problem with our delegation? Amina asked, already opening her email. No, just check the Transportation and Logistics Partners section. Amina scrolled through the document, scanning names of governmental representatives, NGO leaders, and corporate sponsors, until she reached the section on summit logistics. There, listed as CEO of Air Humanitarian Response, a division of Cole Aviation Group, was a name she hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. Ethan Cole. She stared at the screen, her heartbeat steady despite the unexpected jolt of seeing his name. I see. He's providing transportation services for the summit. I thought you should know before you arrived, Nisha said carefully. Given your history. History is precisely what it is, Amina replied, her voice neutral. But thank you for the heads up. After ending the call, Amina closed her laptop and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. 10 years ago, the sight of Ethan's name would have triggered a cascade of painful memories. Now it registered as little more than a footnote, a curious coincidence in her otherwise meticulously planned life. The following afternoon, Amina waited at JFK's arrivals area, watching as passengers streamed through the gate. When the triplets appeared, Zora's curly hair now styled in elegant braids, Malcolm's serious expression brightening at the sight of his mother, Maya waving enthusiastically, something in Amina's chest expanded with fierce pride. Mom! Maya reached her first, throwing her arms around Amina's waist. The program was amazing. I got to study with Professor Reyes. He says my linguistic pattern recognition is unprecedented. She learned Farsi in 3 weeks, Malcolm added, adjusting his glasses as he joined the embrace. The instructors said they'd never seen anything like it. Zora approached more sedately, though her eyes sparkled with excitement. Mom, I presented my neuroplasticity research to actual neuroscientists. They want me to continue the work during the school year with remote mentorship. As they walked through the terminal, the children's voices overlapped with stories of astronomical observations, mathematical challenges, and linguistic discoveries. Amina absorbed every detail, asking questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of each child's specialized interests. You look tired, Mom, Maya observed suddenly, her perceptiveness extending beyond languages to emotional cues. Just busy preparing for the UN summit, Amina explained, guiding them toward the exit. It will be the biggest recognition of our work to date. Can we attend? Zora asked. The Youth Panel on Innovation in Global Health is accepting applications from under 18s with relevant projects. Of course, Amina smiled. I've already submitted your names. The committee was particularly interested in your water purification design. As they neared the exit, a private jet touched down on a distant runway. Inside, Ethan Cole loosened his tie and reviewed briefing materials for the UN summit. The Air Humanitarian Response Contract, providing transportation for delegates from 40 countries, represented a critical lifeline for Cole Aviation Group after years of financial mismanagement. The advance team will meet us at the Peninsula Hotel, his assistant informed him. The logistics briefing is scheduled for 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Ethan nodded absently, scanning the participant list without registering the names. His mind was occupied with the board meeting scheduled for immediately after the summit, a meeting that would determine whether he retained control of the company his grandfather had founded. Your wife called again, the assistant added carefully. She wanted to confirm your attendance at the Bennington Foundation dinner on Friday. Tell Vanessa I'll be there, Ethan replied, though they both knew the likelihood of him attending another charity function during this critical business week was minimal. The following days saw Manhattan transform into the epicenter of global health policy. Flags of member nations lined the approach to the United Nations headquarters, security checkpoints created a labyrinth around the complex, and luxury hotels filled with delegations from around the world. At the Peninsula, Amina briefed her team on final preparations while the triplets prepared their presentation for the youth panel. Across town at the Four Seasons, Ethan directed his staff to ensure flawless execution of transportation logistics while fielding increasingly panicked calls from investors. The morning of the summit's opening session dawned bright and clear. Amina, elegant in a tailored navy suit, reviewed her notes one final time before gathering the triplets, each dressed in coordinating outfits that balanced professionalism with their youth. Remember, she told them as their car approached the UN complex, this is more than a conference. The decisions made here will affect healthcare delivery for millions of vulnerable people worldwide. Is that why there are protesters? Malcolm asked, pointing to a group holding signs demanding greater access to medications in developing countries. Yes, Amina nodded. Many believe, as we do, that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. Part of our work is making that belief a reality. Inside the Grand United Nations General Assembly Hall, delegates and representatives from around the world found their seats. Amina conferred briefly with the Director General of the World Health Organization, while the triplets settled into chairs reserved for the youth panel participants. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats, announced a voice over the loudspeaker. The opening session will begin in 5 minutes. Ethan Cole entered the hall surrounded by assistants, his slightly graying temples and tailored suit projecting authority despite the strain evident around his eyes. Years of high-pressure decisions and declining business success had etched lines into his once smooth face, though he maintained the athletic build and confident stride that had once been his hallmark. His gaze swept the room, mentally checking that transportation arrangements had proceeded as planned when he spotted a familiar profile across the crowded hall. For a moment, time seemed to suspend as recognition dawned. Amina stood with her back to him, engaged in conversation with the Secretary General, her posture radiating confidence and purpose. When she turned to greet another delegate, Ethan felt the impact like a physical blow. The woman he had cruelly dismissed as insufficient now commanded the respect of world leaders. The flight attendant he had abandoned pregnant and alone now stood at the center of global health policy. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment he questioned his own memory. "Dr. Cole, are you feeling well?" one of his assistants asked, noticing his sudden pallor. Ethan couldn't respond, his eyes fixed on Amina as she turned fully in his direction. The moment their gazes connected across the crowded hall, he saw it. The brief, almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders, the slight raising of her chin, the cool assessment in her eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the reaction vanished, replaced by the same professional composure she showed to everyone else in the room. The Secretary General stepped to the podium, commanding attention as the session began. "We are honored to have with us today Dr. Amina Ba, whose global health initiative has revolutionized medical care in conflict zones. Her protocol, which we formally adopt today, has already saved over 57,000 documented lives in refugee camps around the world." The hall erupted in applause. Ethan watched, stunned, as the woman he had called insufficient received a standing ovation from world leaders. While Amina acknowledged the applause with gracious nods, he remained frozen in his seat, confronting a truth he had never allowed himself to consider. The greatest mistake of his life had not been losing her, but failing to recognize her extraordinary worth from the beginning. On the night before the conference, Amina had slept peacefully, unaware that in less than 24 hours she would come face to face with the man who had rejected her as insufficient. Now in a world where her name opened doors, he desperately tried to enter. On the night before the conference, Amina had slept peacefully, unaware that in less than 24 hours she would come face to face with the man who had rejected her as insufficient. Now in a world where her name opened doors, he desperately tried to enter. The United Nations headquarters gleamed beneath the autumn sun, its glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky as diplomats and global health experts streamed through security checkpoints. Amina arrived early with the triplets, her navy suit complemented by a subtle gold pin, the GHI emblem she had designed herself 7 years ago in that small Harlem office. "Dr. Ba," the Secretary General asked if you could join him for a brief meeting before the formal proceedings, whispered her assistant, handing her a revised schedule. "Of course. Children, remember you need to be at the Youth Innovation Panel by 10:30, Amina instructed, straightening Malcolm's collar. "Maya, do you have your presentation notes?" "All memorized," Maya replied confidently, tapping her temple. "I've prepared my introduction in 6 languages, depending on the audience composition." The Grand Assembly Hall hummed with the energy of consequential events about to unfold. Representatives from 193 nations found their seats while translators adjusted their equipment and photographers jostled for position. Amina stood near the center of the hall, engaged in conversation with the Director General of the World Health Organization, her posture relaxed, yet commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The opening session will begin in 5 minutes. Announced a voice over the loudspeakers. Through the main entrance, Ethan Cole arrived surrounded by his executive team, their matching air humanitarian response lapel pins identifying them as logistics partners. At 42, Ethan's athletic frame remained impressive in his tailored suit, though fine lines around his eyes and the silver threading his temples hinted at recent stress. He scanned the room with practiced confidence, a habit developed over years of commanding aircraft and boardrooms. Then he saw her. Amina stood 20 yards away, her back to him as she laughed at something the WHO director said. The recognition was instant. Despite the decade between then and now, despite the dramatic transformation from the vulnerable young woman he had abandoned to this polished professional commanding universal respect. Ethan stopped mid-stride, causing an assistant to collide with his back. "Dr. Cole, is everything all right?" the young man asked, concerned by his boss's sudden pallor. Ethan couldn't respond, his attention fixed on Amina as she turned, her profile coming into view. When she finally turned completely and their eyes met across the crowded hall, the moment stretched into eternity. There was no dramatic reaction from Amina, merely a slight stiffening of her shoulders, an almost imperceptible lift of her chin. Her expression remained professionally neutral, as though she'd spotted a vaguely familiar acquaintance rather than the man who had called her insufficient for someone of his stature. "Dr. Cole?" the assistant repeated. "I'm fine," Ethan managed, tearing his gaze away. "Let's find our seats." The Secretary General opened the session with a speech about global cooperation, but Ethan heard nothing, his focus repeatedly drawn to Amina sitting in the front row. When her introduction came, the hall erupted in a standing ovation. "We have the honor today of welcoming Dr. Amina Ba, whose global health initiative has revolutionized medical care in conflict zones," the Secretary General announced. "Her protocol, which we formally adopt today as the international standard, has already saved over 57,000 documented lives in refugee camps around the world." Ethan watched, stunned, as the woman he had dismissed as an unrealistic dreamer received recognition from world leaders. The flight attendant with medical school aspirations whom he had abandoned pregnant had transformed into someone whose work literally rewrote international standards. During the networking reception that followed the opening session, Ethan deliberately maneuvered through the crowd, calculating his approach. He watched as Amina moved with ease among diplomats and healthcare leaders, exchanging ideas and accepting congratulations with genuine humility. "Amina," he said when he finally engineered their proximity, his voice betraying uncertainty he rarely showed. "I didn't know you would be here." She turned, her eyes professionally neutral. "Dr. Cole, your company provides transportation for the UN, I presume?" The formality of her response, devoid of either warmth or hostility, disoriented him more than anger would have. She spoke as though addressing a service provider, not a man with whom she shared profound history. "Yes, you look well. Very well." He heard himself stammering like an adolescent, his usual corporate confidence evaporating. "Thank you. If you'll excuse me, I need to find my children. They're participating in the youth panel on innovation in global health." "Children? You have children?" The question emerged louder than he intended, drawing glances from nearby attendees. As if summoned by his query, 3 10-year-olds approached, their bearing reflecting their mother's poised confidence despite their youth. Ethan felt the physical impact of recognition. 3 pairs of eyes, his own eyes, looking at him with curiosity. "Mom, the panel was amazing. Zora talked about our water purification project and everyone applauded," exclaimed the boy, whose features combined Amina's determined expression with Ethan's coloring. "Malcolm solved an implementation problem that stumped the WHO logistics team," added the girl with elegant braids, her accent reflecting her mother's international exposure. Amina smiled at her children with unrestrained pride. "I'm so proud of you all. This is a colleague, Doctor. Ethan Cole of Air Humanitarian Response." Ethan stood paralyzed. Triplets. She had given birth to triplets. His children who called another person Mom with adoration in their eyes. "Dr. Cole provides airplanes for missions like ours," Amina explained casually, as though introducing any business associate. "Cool. Do you fly the planes too?" asked the first girl, Zora, he had just learned, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I used to pilot. Now I just manage the company," Ethan replied, struggling to control his voice. "That's too bad. Flying seems more fun than sitting in offices," observed Malcolm, with analytical directness that reminded Ethan of his own father. The third child, Maya, he presumed, studied him with a penetrating gaze. Your company was mentioned in the transportation panel, but they said the Gates Foundation just announced a better program for remote regions. The conversation halted as the Secretary General approached. Dr. Ba, we need you on stage in 5 minutes for your keynote address. Of course, Amina nodded, then turned to her children. Would you find your seats? I'll join you afterward. As Amina walked away with the Secretary General, Ethan remained rooted in place, staring at the retreating forms of children who carried his DNA but none of his influence. The casual way they'd assessed his company's shortcomings reflected their mother's incisive intelligence. Ethan, darling, there you are! A melodic voice cut through his shock. Vanessa Cole, his wife of 5 years, approached in a designer dress that cost more than Amina's entire wardrobe when they dated. Her diamond wedding ring caught the light as she placed her hand on his arm. We're late for the dinner with the investors. Vanessa, he managed, still disoriented. This is Dr. Amina Ba of the Global Health Initiative. Oh! Vanessa's eyes widened with genuine enthusiasm. You're that famous doctor. Ethan mentioned we might meet you. Your work is truly admirable. Ethan stared at his wife, trying to recall when he had mentioned Amina. Had he spoken her name in his sleep? Had he unconsciously sought news of her success? Thank you, Amina replied with professional courtesy. You make a lovely couple. If you'll excuse us, I have a video conference with our team in Darfur. As she guided the triplets away, Ethan watched her retreating figure, dignified, powerful, infinitely beyond the reach of the damage he had once inflicted. The contrast between the frightened pregnant woman he had abandoned and this globally respected leader made his stomach clench with a sensation he rarely experienced: shame. On the podium minutes later, Amina delivered her address with the confidence of someone who had found her true purpose. When she spoke of dignity in healthcare access, of seeing humanity in each patient regardless of circumstance, her eyes briefly found Ethan's in the audience. When systems and individuals decide who is worthy of care based on convenience or perceived value, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, we perpetuate the very inequities our medical oaths compel us to address. Though she never mentioned him directly, Ethan felt each word like a precisely placed scalpel, excising the comfortable lies he had told himself about their shared past. While she walked away with the children, Ethan observed her, dignified, powerful, infinitely beyond the reach of the damage he had once caused. The contrast between the frightened pregnant woman he had abandoned and this globally respected leader made his stomach clench with a sensation he rarely experienced: shame. While she walked away with the children, Ethan observed her, dignified, powerful, infinitely beyond the reach of the damage he had once caused. The contrast between the frightened pregnant woman he had abandoned and this globally respected leader made his stomach clench with a sensation he rarely experienced: shame. The next morning, Ethan woke to insistent knocking at his hotel suite door. Groggily, he checked his watch, 5:37. Through the peephole, he recognized his communications director, face drawn with urgency. Sir, you need to see this immediately. She thrust the New York Times into his hands, its front page dominated by Amina's photograph. The headline read, Dr. Amina Ba, From Adversity to Global Health Leadership. His coffee grew cold as he devoured the article, which detailed her journey from abandoned pregnant immigrant to world-renowned humanitarian physician. Though he wasn't mentioned by name, certain passages felt like arrows aimed directly at his conscience. Abandoned by the father of her children, a pilot who considered her pregnancy an inconvenience to his career, and left with nothing but determination after being told she was insufficient for a man of prominence. The article praised her extraordinary resilience in raising triplets while completing medical school, and quoted colleagues marveling at her unfathomable strength in transforming personal tragedy into global impact. A photograph showed Amina with the triplets, his children, whose names he now learned properly for the first time: Zora, Malcolm, and Maya Ba. Not Cole, never Cole. His phone began ringing incessantly. The communications director hovered anxiously as he ignored call after call. "Sir, the investors have seen the Times article. They're questioning whether Dr. Ba is the same woman you mentioned during your divorce proceedings as a passing affair without consequences." Ethan's jaw tightened. His first marriage had ended partly due to his infidelities, including what he'd characterized as a meaningless relationship with a flight attendant. Those divorce records were supposed to be sealed. "And your current wife has been calling every 5 minutes," the assistant added hesitantly. "She's quite upset." "Why?" Ethan demanded, though he already knew the answer. "The article mentions triplets, sir. 10-year-old triplets. Simple mathematics that even his investors could calculate. 10 years ago, he was still married to his first wife, and those children had his eyes, his jawline. Features evident even in the newspaper photographs. His phone buzzed again. A text from Vanessa. "Don't come home. My lawyer will contact yours." In the conference center lobby later that morning, Ethan spotted Amina exiting an elevator. Abandoning all pretense of professionalism, he rushed toward her. "You planned this," he accused, struggling to keep his voice low. "Telling your story to expose me." Amina regarded him with unnerving calm. "I've been telling my story for 10 years, Ethan. In lectures, interviews, books. The fact that you never became aware of it simply demonstrates how little you cared to know about your own children." "They are my children, too." The words emerged louder than intended, drawing glances from passing delegates. "I have rights." "Rights?" She laughed softly, the sound containing no humor. "Rights are for those who accept responsibilities. You abdicated yours when you said I would be a burden to your future." "I was young, stupid. People change, Amina." "Yes, they do." Her eyes assessed him coolly. "I changed from a frightened flight attendant into a physician managing a $120 million organization. From a woman you deemed insufficient into someone your own investors now respect more than you." The truth was merciless. Air Humanitarian Response, with its annual revenue of $70 million, was significantly smaller than GHI. Financially, professionally, by every measurable metric, Amina had surpassed him. "I want to know my children, Amina, please." "That decision belongs to them, not me. They're 10 years old, exceptionally intelligent, and have sufficient information to form their own opinions." Before he could respond, her assistant approached. "Dr. Ba, you're needed on stage in 5 minutes for the panel on crisis response protocols." In the grand hall, Ethan found a seat near the back, watching as Amina took the center position on stage. Her presentation on medical responses to humanitarian crises was broadcast live to a global audience. She spoke with authority and passion about her work in refugee camps, about dignity in humanitarian treatment. "When I was abandoned pregnant, without resources and far from home," she said unexpectedly, her voice calm and steady, "I understood that the true humanitarian crisis begins when we deny humanity to another being. My children taught me that our response to rejection defines who we become. Today, GHI serves thousands of women in situations similar to what I faced." The hall fell into absolute silence. In the audience, Ethan shrank into his seat. "Our organization grew to help precisely those who were considered insufficient, inadequate, or disposable by people in positions of power. Because no one is insufficient. No one is a burden to be abandoned." Her eyes briefly found his in the audience before continuing her technical discourse. After the presentation, Ethan tried approaching her again, but found his path blocked by the triplets who protectively surrounded their mother. "Dr. Cole, your company was mentioned in the panel on emergency medical transport," Maya said politely. But the Gates Foundation announced a better program for remote regions. Ethan perceived the penetrating gaze of the girl, Amina's same evaluating look. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, lowering his voice. "We know your name from the program," Malcolm responded simply. Amina intervened softly. "Children, let's move to the next session. Dr. Cole certainly has important commitments." At that moment, a blonde woman approached Ethan. "Darling, we're late for dinner with the investors." Vanessa's wedding ring gleamed ostentatiously, though her eyes were cold. "Vanessa, this is Dr. Amina Ba of the Global Health Initiative," Ethan introduced, visibly uncomfortable. "Oh, you're that famous doctor. Ethan mentioned we might meet. Your work is truly admirable." Vanessa smiled, completely oblivious to the palpable tension. "Thank you. You make a lovely couple," Amina responded with professional courtesy. "If you'll excuse us, I have a video conference with our team in Darfur." On the third day of the conference, the triplets approached Ethan during a break. He had been watching them from afar, noting Malcolm's methodical note-taking, Zora's intense focus during scientific presentations, Maya's easy conversations in multiple languages with international delegates. "Dr. Cole," Maya began, taking the lead, "our mother told us you are our biological father." Ethan felt his heart race. "Yes, I am. And I would very much like to get to know you better." "Why did you leave our mother?" Malcolm asked directly. "It was complicated. I wasn't ready to be a father." "But you have other children now," Zora observed, referencing the photos on his professional profile showing him with 2 young children from his current marriage. "Yes, I do. It's different. I was very young when you decided we weren't important," Malcolm completed. "It wasn't like that. I didn't know you would be triplets. Our mother didn't know either," Maya said softly, but she stayed. Ethan realized there was no resentment in their voices, only clinical curiosity, like scientists studying an interesting specimen. "We would like to propose an arrangement," Zora continued, surprisingly articulate for her 10 years. "We can meet occasionally, under controlled terms, to satisfy your paternal curiosity and our genetic curiosity. But we don't need a father now. Our family is already complete." Their proposal, delivered with such adult composure, left Ethan speechless. These children, his children, were evaluating him as he might assess a business proposition, weighing his potential value against possible disruptions to their well-established lives. That evening, as the conference's formal proceedings concluded, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room. The television silently displayed financial news, a ticker showing Cole Aviation Group's stock dropping another 3%. His phone contained 17 missed calls from board members, investors, and his wife's attorney. The Times article had accelerated a collapse already years in the making. His professional reputation, built on family connections rather than earned respect, was crumbling under scrutiny. His marriage was ending. His connection to his younger children would soon be subject to court-mandated visitation schedules. And his first 3 children, the ones whose existence he had denied for a decade, had offered him the clinical kindness of occasional meetings, more than he deserved but less than he suddenly, desperately wanted. While watching Ethan walk away from his children, head bowed, defeated by his own moral mediocrity, Amina felt not the sweet taste of revenge, but the serene confirmation that life had its own sense of justice and that the next phase of this story belonged not to her or Ethan, but to the 3 extraordinary young people who carried the best and none of the worst of both of them. While watching Ethan walk away from his children, head bowed, defeated by his own moral mediocrity, Amina felt not the sweet taste of revenge, but the serene confirmation that life had its own sense of justice, and that the next phase of this story belonged not to her or Ethan, but to the 3 extraordinary young people who carried the best and none of the worst of both of them. On the final day of the conference, dawn painted Manhattan's skyline in hues of gold and amber. Amina stood at the window of her hotel suite, watching the city awaken. The past 3 days had unfolded in ways she could never have anticipated, bringing into her carefully ordered life the chaos that was Ethan Cole. Her phone chimed with a message from Zora. "Mom, we're having breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Malcolm is calculating the statistical probability of Dad's company surviving its current financial crisis." Amina smiled at her daughter's matter-of-fact tone. The triplets had taken to referring to Ethan as Dad, in a clinical, almost anthropological sense, a biological designation rather than an emotional one. The rooftop terrace of the United Nations building offered spectacular views of the East River, its waters glinting under the autumn sun. Amina had sought solitude here before the closing ceremonies, needing a moment to process the whirlwind of emotions the conference had stirred. She hadn't expected to find Ethan there, standing alone at the railing, his posture conveying a defeat that his tailored suit couldn't disguise. He turned at the sound of her approach, his face revealing surprise followed by resignation. For a moment, they stood in silence. The city sprawled before them, a fitting backdrop to the empire she had built and the one he had squandered. "The Secretary General's assistant said I might find you here," Amina said, maintaining a professional distance. "I wanted to ensure we had clarity about the children's proposed arrangement before we all depart." Ethan nodded, his gaze returning to the river. "My second marriage is ending," he confessed abruptly. "Vanessa saw the article, made the connections. My reputation at the company is also compromised. Investors don't like surprises." "I'm sorry about your personal situation," Amina replied sincerely. "But I don't regret the article. My story is mine to tell." "You succeeded, didn't you?" He turned to face her fully. "Proved I was wrong in every respect. This was never about you, Ethan." The simple truth rolled off her tongue with ease. It was about survival, then growth, then purpose. At no point in my journey were you the goal. The revelation struck him with devastating clarity. He had been irrelevant to her success. His abandonment, which he had imagined as a defining blow to her life, had been merely a temporary obstacle she had magnificently overcome. "The children offered me occasional meetings," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I think that's more than I deserve. They are generous. They have their grandmother's heart." For the first time, her tone softened. "You can be a positive presence in their lives if you choose to be. Not as an authority or father figure, but as someone who respects who they are." A cool breeze ruffled Ethan's graying hair. "I never imagined them as actual people, you know. When I left, it was just an abstract concept, a pregnancy, an inconvenience. I never pictured them having personalities, interests, opinions." "That was your loss," Amina stated simply. "Every day of the past 10 years has been filled with their uniqueness. Their first words, first steps, first equations, first compositions." The silence between them grew heavy with the weight of irretrievable time. "I won't ask for your forgiveness," Ethan finally said. "I don't deserve it." "Forgiveness isn't what matters here," Amina replied. "What matters is that you see them, truly see them, for who they are, not for what they represent to you." The closing ceremony of the summit proceeded with appropriate pageantry. The Secretary General formally announced the global adoption of the BA Protocol, calling it a paradigm shift in humanitarian healthcare that will save countless lives in our most vulnerable communities. Amina delivered brief remarks, thanking her team and acknowledging the countless healthcare workers implementing her methods in crisis zones worldwide. From his seat in the middle rows, Ethan watched her command the global stage with a grace and authority that made his corporate achievements seem hollow by comparison. The triplets participated in the Youth Innovation Showcase, presenting their water purification system designed specifically for refugee camp implementation. Malcolm explained the mathematical models, Zora detailed the neurological health benefits, and Maya presented in 4 different languages to ensure maximum accessibility. That evening, in their New York apartment, Amina helped the children pack for their upcoming trip to Liberia. The GHI would inaugurate a new hospital in Monrovia, funded by the Gates Foundation and the American government. "Will we see Dr. Cole again?" Maya asked, carefully folding her ceremonial dress for the hospital opening. "If you wish to," Amina replied, maintaining her promise to let them determine the nature of that relationship. "He seems sad," Malcolm observed, organizing his notebooks by size and subject. "His company has a 73% probability of requiring restructuring within the next fiscal quarter. He made choices," Zora said, her moral compass as direct as ever. "Choices have consequences." Amina looked at her 3 children, so different yet united in their extraordinary abilities and clear-eyed wisdom. "Yes, they do. And sometimes the consequences teach us who we truly are." 2 days later, JFK Airport bustled with the usual chaos of international departures. Amina guided the triplets through security, her carry-on containing both medical journals and the final signed agreements from the United Nations. GHI staff coordinated their movement, managing logistics for the 20-person team traveling to Liberia for the hospital inauguration. From a distance, Ethan watched them navigate the terminal. He hadn't planned to come, had no official reason to be there, yet found himself drawn to this moment of observation. Amina walked confidently, surrounded by aides and security personnel, the triplets keeping perfect pace. They formed a unit, complete and self-sufficient, requiring nothing from the man who had once deemed them an inconvenience. As Amina checked her phone, confirming final details with her Monrovia team, a call came through from an unexpected source. The Nobel Committee representative's voice carried clearly through her earpiece. "Dr. Ba, I'm pleased to inform you that you have been shortlisted for this year's Nobel Prize in Medicine. The formal announcement will come next month, but the committee wanted you to be aware of your consideration." As she received this news, her gaze happened to cross Ethan's across the terminal. Their eyes met briefly, no triumph in hers, only serenity. Revenge had never been her fuel. Excellence had. On the plane, as they reached cruising altitude at 50,000 feet, Amina gazed out the window at the city that had witnessed her transformation. The circle was complete. The abandonment that should have destroyed her had been merely the beginning of her true ascent. Zora leaned against her shoulder, already absorbed in a medical journal. Malcolm calculated flight paths and fuel efficiency in his notebook. Maya practiced Swahili phrases they would need in East African refugee camps after their Liberian mission. Amina closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to feel the fullness of the moment. At 50,000 feet, between the past that had forged her and the future she was building, she understood the fundamental truth of her journey. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive is being underestimated by those unable to see our true worth. For in the struggle to prove not to them but to ourselves, we discover heights we might never otherwise have explored. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.